Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag-and-drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. This is The Next Reel, everybody. I'm Pete Wright, and that there is Andy Nelson.
Hey, hey, hey.
And we spoil movies. Tonight on the show, some of us may live to see the sunrise in George Romero's 1978 classic, Dawn of the Dead.
George Romero brings us the most intensely shocking motion picture experience for all times.
It gets up and kills. The people it kills get up and kill. This situation must be controlled before it's too late. They are multiplying too rapidly.
Dawn of the Dead.
Meet me on the roof at 9 o'clock. Getting out.
I don't believe
We're
it.
gonna
What?
get out in the chopper. We've got to survive. Somebody's got to survive.
They kill for one reason. They kill for food. They eat their victims.
Imagine, if you will, that something has gone terribly wrong.
Shoot it, man.
Now, accept the fact that there's no escaping the horrible consequences. George Romero brings back the dead. Night of the Living Dead has ended. Dawn of the Dead is here.
Andy, if you could give us a little bit of a recap. Why are we doing this series about the zombies?
1968, 50th anniversary, Night of the Living Dead came out, and it was really kind of a genre-defining film. And it took George Romero 10 years to continue. But having a chance to kind of do more with what he had done before and find a way to continue developing themes and just play around with social commentary, I think is a lot of why he decided that he would continue with it. So I know initially we talked about, are we going to do horror films from 1968? But then when we looked at this trilogy, this original trilogy that he had created, we realized that there's a lot of stuff going on within that full trilogy, and it's worth talking about, not just sticking with 1968 horror films. And so that's why we are doing the trilogy, and that's why we're talking about Dawn of the Dead tonight.
In 1978, at least we can say we were alive, but neither of us were in the theaters watching this movie. Do you have a memory of 1978 that you could share with the people?
Bell bottoms and butterfly collars.
Right.
I know I probably was wearing those.
I'd like to see that.
Oh, look at some of my early school pictures.
Little Andy and your little bowl haircut.
Probably around the time when I gave myself a haircut in one of those pictures. So I've got that
so
really short
good.
bangs.
Oh,
it's
you were
fantastic.
a peach.
Pretty fantastic. Oh yes. Oh yes.
Well, it was an interesting time, right? The end of the 70s. We're in the middle of energy downturn that we were leading up to in 78, leading up to the 79 oil shock. It was the second major oil crisis of the 70s, thanks to the Iranian Revolution. We have these images of gas lines in Carter's America, and that is that I find a really interesting image going into this movie. Some of the images that we see on the news, as we're still reeling from war, and we are dealing with crime, and in a post-Nixon America, and leadership that is failing us, and all of these things go into the mindset of the people making movies, and how well does this movie in 1978 actually reflect some of the more popular cultural gestalt of the time. And I think that, to me, is what makes this interesting, and it's what makes zombie movies interesting. In fact, I mean, you can pretty much put any lens on a zombie movie and you can make it fit the cultural discussion at hand. And so I look forward to that conversation with you here.
In addition to that side of everything going on is this whole idea of shopping centers and all of the stuff going on with Carter's America that you're talking about. But certainly I think this rise of the suburbs, and with shopping centers that were away from city centers where people could go and spend time. It really kind of started building in the 50s. I mean, there had been shopping centers long before that, but really it started kind of growing with some anchor stores and these big box stores in the 50s into the 60s. And I think it really had started taking off around that time and turning into something where people would go and hang out at the mall. And I think that is a key element for this film. And aside from looking at what was going on in kind of in the world politically and economically, I think this element is something that George was really tapping into with the film.
No, I think that's a great point. And that, again, is the sort of zombie lens, right? That we became slightly before this period an automobile nation, right? And we weren't like that before. I mean, this is the growth of suburbs created and these malls, these shopping centers, and where these homes were just sprouting up in the middle of nowhere. We became that culture, and in how many ways can we look at zombie culture as a reflection of suburban America, suburban Canada, suburban, like this is how we got to this point. And I think that is it makes this movie such an interesting reflection of the time.
Really does, yeah.
So let's talk about the movie. It opens just 3 weeks after the close of the movie we watched last week, Night of the Living Dead.
Although that's never said in the film, right?
I don't believe it's ever said in the film. I think I read that in some of the background material.
But I think that the setup for this film is, I love the way that it plays out, because you basically walk into this film. There's already a zombie crisis that's happening. You're now dealing with people who are dealing with this and trying to figure out what is going on and how are they going to handle it. And the whole open just feels chaotic. We're in the newsroom. It's chaos. We're with the police dealing with the situation. That's chaos. Everything is just insane and chaotic. And the film really sets off on a foot that just makes you, really brings you into that world of chaos.
Well, I think one of the most interesting things to that point specifically about this movie is that we don't, when you think about what it was like to watch a movie in 1978, the immediate prequel was 10 years prior, right? So it's not like people could just bring up Night of the Living Dead on iTunes or Netflix and catch up with the story as it ended in the last movie. And that defined, I think, some of the decisions that they had to make for the narrative in this movie. So for those who had seen Night of the Living Dead, there was, you didn't have to rely too much on specific memories to keep the story going, because all you need to know is there is a problem with humans eating humans, and we're going to get you up to speed through this newsroom. None of the characters from the prior movie are in this movie, and so it's kind of you could say it's like a spiritual sequel, if not a direct sequel. It's a universe sequel, if not a direct linear sequel, and I think that makes it an interesting sort of foray into this universe of zombies that might not be fresh for a lot of people.
Well, yeah, it's like Fear the Walking Dead, following up on The Walking Dead. Totally different cast, but it's the same zombie outbreak. It's just now you're following a different story. Yeah, right, and that's just a huge gap in time. And I think that Romero and his team really were able to rely on just people's fascination with horror movies and with zombies, and just find that thread to draw people in. And I mean, by this time, 10 years after his film Night of the Living Dead that we talked about last week, I mean, he had done other films. He had done There's Always Vanilla, Season of the Witch, The Crazies. He worked on a TV documentary. He had and Martin, which came out, I think, the same year as this film. So he had been a busy filmmaker, making projects that drew people in, and he was establishing himself as a filmmaker with a certain sense of style that I think allowed people to, look at a film with his name on it and know what to expect.
We're back in the television station, and everything has gone crazy, and they give us a couple of elements in this television station that stick with us through the duration of the film that I like a lot. And the first is, in the last movie, he drove the narrative forward using radio and television broadcasts. And so we were already anchored around this kind of mass media, right? Of course, during emergencies, we're going to have our radio and television on, right? We're going to be trying to see what's going on in the world and how it relates to us, right, in our living room. And so that was expected. Here, we start in the newsroom. We start with our eye on Francine, right? Franny is a producer, and she is working the newscast, and she's working a talk show. It's an interview show between two experts, and it's like a debate show. So they're trying to talk about, what you have to do to these, to the zombies, what's going on in the zombie outbreak, and the other side is trying to take the other side of the zombie outbreak, and it's not going well. It's not going well at all. It's not a position you want to take, trying to get that interview done. But that the interview is something that sticks with us through the duration of the film. We keep checking back into the mass media kind of reporting on what's going on in the world. And as it turns out, when they stop broadcasting, that becomes an interesting data point in the film too.
I enjoy the thread of the broadcast and the way that the broadcasts shift in quality as we progress. You've got these broadcasts at the beginning. It's already chaos in the news station. Toward the end, it's just, it's like improv, TV production.
Yeah.
As people are trying to do stuff, and they've got this guy with the eye patch who just makes me laugh so much. As he's got his little meditation that he's doing at the end. We've got to remain logical. We've got to remain logical. And just like this guy he's off his rocker. But yeah, and the fact that these guys, are heroes, are four characters. They get to a mall and they hide out, and then they have the TV on constantly. That is their outlet to figure out what's going on in the world. And I think that is another thing that spoke to George as far as people's connection to society. And it hits this point where all of a sudden there are no signals, and I found that really interesting because it hits at a very critical point in the film when Steve and Peter and Fran are basically they're kind of, this is a point where they are breaking down as people, and they have been living in a mall, living in this kind of false life for so long, and it's that moment where Fran turns the TV off and she tells Steve, who's always watching, and he's just like, there's nothing on it, and in the middle of dinner, and he gets up and he turns it back on, and it's like that, what are we doing to ourselves? That whole moment, I love the way that kind of connected and came through because of that connection to the TV.
I do too. I love the way that he brought that back, and that statement that makes. I thought that was really great. And I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the station identification for her television station is WGON. And I got to chuckle through that all the way through, especially as they turned off the television, the static on the television. Yep. Yeah, that was a nice little forecast, a little foreshadow.
And we do get a nice little cameo of George Romero and his wife in the news station, as they are two of the people that are working the in the control booth.
Yes, with the crazy guy in the control booth who is like, I love that there's always this guy, this producer, this showrunner, this editor, whatever, station manager, whatever he is, but he's the guy who has to keep people watching the show in spite of everyone being eaten. And so we learn very early in the movie, like within the first minute, that all of the rescue stations, or half the rescue stations that they had keyed up to as their lower third identification to send people to these rescue stations, had already been overrun and were no longer operational. But he wanted to keep those broken IDs up on screen because he said, as long as they're on screen, people will still watch. As soon as we lose those keys, then people are going to turn off the TV. And that, it sounds so ridiculous that is the thing that he's hanging his hat on, and yet that is, of course, that's the job of the news at that point, is to keep people watching. The fact that we're making a statement here about the negative impact of news, that the news is making a conscious choice to broadcast something that isn't true, that is literally fake news.
Yeah.
In 1978, I think it was a prescient and really troubling statement.
I think that's something that Romero really just has a lot of fun with, because he's doing that with the news station. Immediately we cut from the news station and we are following police on a raid in a building where some gang has holed up or something. And you got the SWAT guys and everything. And it's like this incredibly violent shootout. And then all of a sudden, that's where we get to see the zombies, because they make the mistake of going, through some of the wrong doors, and there are zombies there, and people start getting chomped on. And that's where we start getting a sense of the gore and everything. And I think he gives us a lot of the gore. But what struck me as an interesting introduction into that is the horrible, just I guess I would just say racism and just everything that is wrong with that one particular cop, who's just a terrible human being. And, I think Romero is saying something through the eyes of that guy and us watching him as this cop who's busting in there. And then the fact that, yep, the zombies are going to eat him.
And we're going to go along with the ride and feel like he deserves it. You know what I mean? Like, he's just the worst.
And that's an interesting point, because I think right out of the gate, Romero is giving us a little leeway to allow the zombies to not necessarily be completely scary. Sometimes the people are more scary. And like you just said, we're kind of rooting for the zombies to eat that guy.
Yes. And this is the first time we get to see or get to sort of feel ourselves ask that question: are we any better than they are? Are we any better than the zombies? Like, this is the world not a better place to have this guy taken out of it? And that's I think a wonderful position to be in as a member of the audience, to be put in a place to have to ask that question.
Yeah. Very interesting.
It's interesting. I did say last week that I was less interested in the zombie films that leaned heavily on gore and at the expense of story. And I think this film leans more heavily on gore. And we get that early on in this sequence, right? We get that here. We get that in a few scenes later when they go into the basement of this building and see the zombies and just like this orgy of eating each other. It's just disgusting. And they have to kill those zombies. We can talk about that. We get it at the end. They save some of the most delicious gore effects, toward the third act of the film, which are certainly worth talking about. But at no point do I get a sense that this film let go of the story that Romero was trying to tell in order to serve the effects. The effects, to me, served the handling of the story and the narrative, and that it demonstrated that they were able to continue to think deeply about the story they were telling and what they observe in the world, and not just lose complete control and have way too much fun with just watching people chew on each other.
That's something that Romero always focuses on. He likes having the subtext. He likes putting themes in his films, and I think that is largely why this trilogy and some of his other films, I think they stand out more because he is allowing the story to kind of be there, not just the themes, but the story and everything. And he's giving you a sense of all of that, and the way that this film plays out, I think, just gives a lot of that. And we'll have to talk about the different cuts. I've never seen any of the other cuts except for the U.S. theatrical. Mm-hmm. But I know of some of the differences with specifically like the international version that Dario Argento cut. So I think that it's interesting that this film allows for a lot of that. And I feel that that's an element of it that just makes it such a strong property.
I do too. I like that it's making us ask these questions, these what if questions that we're kind of facing right now. Like, what if all sort of civic structure fell apart? And so here we go. We're asking this question: what does a family look like? We have this woman and three men, and one of them is a black man in 1978 trying to figure out how to build a family in a world where so many of our assumptions of convention are gone, right? And we're going to watch that. And in our heads, as we're watching it, we're thinking, I wonder what if in my life, what would this stuff look like? What does it look like to test our sort of themes of masculinity and femininity? We have, through Franny and Stephen, we have these great opportunities to kind of explore, what it's like to have her stand up to assumptions that she is just a completely helpless whelp of a woman. Instead, no, she's going to learn how to fly a helicopter, and she's going to learn how to fire a gun, and she's going to stand up for herself, and she's not going to put up with these guys who are treating her as anything less than because she is A, a woman, or B, pregnant. And I love that. I love that Steven has a lot to learn from these guys who have this really traditional kind of view of masculinity. And how does he fit in this whole model? And so, watching all of these things get tested in this movie, I think are really fun. And of course, then we have them in the mall. And that gets to one of the central themes that you brought up, this consumerism and greed, that the mall was an important place in their lives, as the zombies start coming back. And here we have the people who are living there trying to build this community, and yet all we really see of them is the same thing that we see of the bad guy bikers at the end. There's 4 people who are stealing stuff and eating the food and kind of really getting a lot of joy out of looting. And what do we learn from that?
Yeah, it just is so funny because watching this again really reminded me so much all over again of how this film and the films of Romero, the zombie films, really painted a very clear direction for zombie films and zombie stories afterward. Because watching this again, I just had so many flashbacks, I guess you could say, or flashbacks, I don't know, of moments that happened in The Walking Dead.
Yes.
And how sometimes the zombies are the most horrific things that you have to face. And sometimes it's the people, that the other survivors that are the ones that are the real monsters.
Yeah.
What an interesting
most of the time
thing.
It's the survivors.
Yeah, what an interesting thing for Romero to be pointing out back then. And I really love it. I think that it's such an interesting look into society. And I just this is a film that I really enjoy watching. And every time I see it, yes, there's some real cheesy stuff, but man, I just think that the story here is such a fascinating look at the world.
The cheesy stuff, I'm with you. There's cheesy stuff. Some of the music is cheesy, but to me, all the cheesy stuff actually works in the narrative too, because it's a celebration of the superficiality of the story they're trying to tell. It works so well for me, and it fits so naturally. What do you think? This was a big question I had. What do you think about the smaller group, right? In the remake, which we're both fans of.
Yeah, which we've talked about.
Exactly. We've talked about on the show. There are more people in the mall that take up residence in the mall than we have here in our small group of 4. How does that change the way you take the story that they're trying to tell here?
I don't know if I have thought much about the difference in the cast sizes. I mean, definitely. I mean, this is just 4 people. That one probably had, 10 people.
Yeah.
It was a pretty big
that.
group of people, if not more than 10, because I know there are more people within the groups, the different people who get infected and whatnot. Plus, there's the guy across the way in the other shop.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's quite a bit of stuff that's going on in that. But I don't know. I guess part of me assumes that it's the nature of kind of the lower budget still filmmaking, and just having 4 was probably easier for Romero as far as the storytelling goes. But
I kind of feel like you're getting off too easy with that answer. I know you're right, but and part of me also thinks that when I think about it just being 4 people in this huge mall, I can't help but wonder, with huge spaces like this, it's like the first place that other people in society would probably assume is a great place to set up one of these, zombie rescue stations or whatever it is, where they're, protecting people from it. It's a great place to set up and have people say, hey, head here. That would be on the news, as opposed to all the ones that apparently are already gone. But aside from that, I don't know. I feel like just having 4 just makes for a cleaner story, I guess. I don't know if I have really any good answer for you. Well, I don't know if I have a good answer either. I found myself really finding a lot to love about the small cast because we get to spend so much time with them. At points, it feels like a little too much time and sort of intimacy that we get with them kind of rebuilding the mall and taking out the bodies, and more montages of making runs through bodies and through zombies shambling about, that I feel like maybe we were able to have a little bit more of a frenetic experience by having a larger cast in the remake, and it just allowed us to bounce around a little bit more. But I found I really was leaning on the experience of being kind of a part of this family, and really liking kind of watching them sort of work together in a way that wasn't quite so easy for my ADHD to adapt to. You know what I mean? Like it made me work a little bit, and I liked that. Made me have it. It felt like a much more patient structure.
Well, and having 4 people, it gives you more time to spend with them, like you were saying. And when they're here for a prolonged period of time, I would say they're here for, I don't know, a couple months or something. I mean, she is, her pregnancy is definitely starting to show by the time we get to the end of the film.
Right.
I feel like it allows us time to really get a feel for the life that these people have had here and how it has transformed them. And you get those great comparisons where Fran is putting on makeup, and then you get shots of the mannequins. And even after she rejects Steven's proposal, there's a great moment where the two of them are kind of post-coital in the bed, just sitting there, and they are completely frozen, just like mannequins. And it's almost like this is what's happening to them. This consumerism that has kind of taken over their brains has left them to be nothing but these hollow figures that are roaming the mall. And are they any better than the zombies by that point?
That's right. That's right.
It's so to that end, I think that having just the 4 people, and by that point 3, gives us a good sense of this loss of kind of this societal connection. And I like that.
Well, and so I would say then, as a horror film, does having the smaller cast make it a more compelling experience? We have 2 meaningful major deaths in this movie, and 1 sort of almost death. And my hunch is that, and my experience is that when Roger dies and when Stephen ultimately dies, those 2 deaths mean more because there were fewer people for me to care about in the movie overall. Is that a fair sentiment?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, Night of the Living Dead was an hour and a half, and there were 7 people there who died. I mean, yeah, we didn't get to know the daughter really. We just knew she was sick. We never really got to know Tom's girlfriend very well. I think that it's a fair assumption. We're spending more time with these people. We're getting to know them better.
Because in this case, we have Roger, who spends a lot of his time in a wagon. But we know already what happens when you get bit, because we now have experience from, if you had a memory of the 1968 film and other films that have come up since, or had come up in the interim, that you have a sense of when somebody gets bitten, something bad's going to happen to them. So you already are facing the pain of him turning. And then we get his ultimate death, which I thought was fantastic. As that entire sequence, as it sort of builds and builds, and when his head finally comes up off the pillow, and we see what has become. I thought that was a really moving moment.
For me, it always is when the blanket starts moving again.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, here it is.
Yeah,
I just love that. It's done so well. And actually, I think Stevens is great too. Just the way I think they both work so incredibly well in different ways. Roger, because that look when he comes out of the blanket and you see that great zombie look that he's got, it's fantastic. But then Steven, I mean, he's another one. It's just his zombie Steven is such a strong zombie. The way that he walks and moves, I think that he really got it and clicked well with that kind of vibe. So I it's 2 really powerful character deaths that change and move us forward. And I think maybe now is an interesting time to just mention the original ending, as Romero had thought of it. He wanted to actually go dark again, like he did with Night of the Living Dead, where all of this trauma was going to be too much for Peter and Fran. Peter goes into the room, as he does in the film currently, because he can't take it, and he's got a gun and he's going to kill himself. And Fran, she goes up on the roof, and the helicopter is running, and she sees the zombies come up, not Peter, who she's hoping for, and she throws herself up headfirst into the blades of the helicopter and decapitates herself.
Which is we should add a callback to a sequence earlier where we had seen a zombie step up on a box and walk right into the blades. And so,
yep, choppy chop.
Okay.
And I think that, I mean, he realized as things were moving that this film already had a little bit more of a comical feel to it, and so he realized that going dark probably was the wrong ending for the tone that he was creating. And so he decided not to do that. And that's why all of a sudden you've got that kind of like that heroic, as Romero describes it, the John Wayne music that kicks in when Peter turns his gun on the zombies and races out to go hop in the helicopter with Fran. It's very funny, but man, I can only imagine what that darker ending would be, though, you know?
What do you think about the ending as it is, the theatrical ending? I mean, with the John Wayne music, I mean, it feels like,
it's a little much, but it's something I've always questioned. And now that I know that that's how the ending was supposed to go, I'm like, oh, that's why Peter decided he was going to go into the other room. So I'm like, why is he making this choice? And I always felt like it was a strange screenwriting choice to just allow for a little more energy in the escape. But I like the ending. I like the fact that the helicopter's low on gas. Oh, the other part, which I think is an interesting element, that after she throws her head into the blades, the camera was going to hold on the helicopter blades, and you would just watch them spin as the end credits rolled. And then the helicopter blades would sputter and die because the helicopter would run out of gas, just to show you that even if they had gotten into the helicopter, they weren't going to get very far.
Yeah.
I think that's great. And you don't get that sense with the ending now, but it is, I mean, she says we don't have a lot of gas, and you know that they're not going to get too far. So I don't know. I think either way, I think it allows for an interesting ending. It's just now we've got a little more hopeful, open-ended ending.
Yeah, and I'm all about the hopeful bit. The thing that really makes the film suffer for me is his actual escape from the zombies, as they're shambling toward him after he manages to kill Stephen, and he climbs the ladder and he comes out and he does his. It's just kind of a cheap series of punches and kicks to get him to the helicopter, and it becomes a B movie, in its execution in this one little sequence, just him getting out of the mall and to the helicopter. And it's one of those things that makes me, like, every time I think about it and I think about watching it with somebody else who's never seen it, it's one of those moments I'm going to have to say, now just get past this part. Just close your eyes and just get past this part and know he makes it to the helicopter, because the end is really good. I love it when he's in the helicopter, and I love it that she is the one flying it and that he's in the back seat and he is, exhausted and rescued, and it's great. Like that's great. And it's actually, it's hopeful, but only insofar as, it's open-ended. I love the way you put that. Everything else, I really suffer through that last bit.
I can see why you do. I guess I have just always written it off as, okay, that's how it goes. It's never been a huge problem, but it is still just one of those things that I've always questioned, and at least now I have an answer for it.
Okay. I also like knowing that we have an answer for it. Can we then at least talk about the final route of the mall?
Yeah, this is it's a great bit with Tom Savini and a bunch of real motorcycle gang who break into the mall, and because they see the helicopter, they see these people using it. I mean, it's exactly what you see in so many zombie stories afterward. And it's really done in just another, going back to the chaos of the open, this is another just totally chaotic element at the ending that's just is like, I can only imagine how they would react to that, because it is a kind of a fully terrifying thing to be invaded like that by these people who clearly have no care of anything by this point. I mean, they're throwing pies in zombies' faces. I mean, that's how insane these guys are. They don't care. And for Peter and Stephen and Fran to kind of go to war with them, I can only imagine how really terrifying it is. And they're lucky that their little wall trick worked, because otherwise they would have followed them right up to the top and killed them.
I think that sequence, for me, and maybe this is unexpected, for me, that really works, especially the pies. Like, I find that really funny, because one thing that we're guaranteed, as soon as we see some bikers throw pies in zombie faces, we know those are the bikers that are going to get eaten first, and so that is kind of the most fun. It's the reward of these kinds of sequences, that you make it through the goofy stuff and you get a chuckle, and then voila, dinner. And so I really like that, and we get to see some of the best effects so far of the series.
Well, and that is, I think, the big thing that really got to rise with this. And certainly, when you only have 4 people that you're following in the film, that is where a horror film really does slow down, because all of a sudden it's a lot harder to pick them off, right? And that's why the remake has so many people, so you have more opportunities to kill people off.
Yeah.
Here with 4, I mean, we get to kill Roger, but that's it. And until we get to this ending, and when finally Stephen ends up getting attacked and taken by the zombies. But when we get all of these bikers to come in, we do really get to start playing around with the effects and the deaths and all of that. And yes, we get some just glorious makeup effect filled deaths.
What are your favorites?
Well, my favorite in the film is one that you mentioned already that isn't in the ending, but it's earlier with the helicopter chopping the blades, chopping the guy's head off, or the top of his head off. I've always found that such a fun thing to watch. And I didn't ever realize how they did it. I was always just under the assumption that they just figured out the exact height that somebody needed to actually stand up to chop off with a helicopter blade, which seems super unsafe to me. But I didn't put it past these guys, because we know they do things rather unsafely. What they did is they actually had like a string. They had this, Savini had built this thing on top of his head that had a string through it, and basically they like fishing line, and they basically yanked it, and that just kind of cut through it and basically chopped the entire top off that fell away. And that was it. And he was nowhere near getting hit by those blades. So I thought that was so much more clever than what I had always assumed that they had done.
Oh, that's really good. So we also have the machete at the end. We get the machete sequence,
right?
Which is fun. It's like taking out the seed from an avocado. You know what I'm saying, right? Smack it in there. That's what that felt like. And then we have the most gruesome of the eating, where one of them gets taken down by a lot of zombies, and there's just a lot of the ripping open of the intestines and gnashing of the and my assumption there is that we've got more pig intestines and a lot of those kinds of goodies.
A lot of those goodies. That's right. Plus, we get a screwdriver into the ear, which is a really
that was an interesting one, because it was really slow. That was a great effect, because it was very patient.
Yeah, Savini, he is just a really interesting character who actually, I didn't know this. He was actually asked to be a part of Night of the Living Dead, but he was drafted. And so that was kind of it. So this is where he makes his debut as an effects artist on this film, and he had done some horror makeup before this, but and I think because of the time that he served in Vietnam, that kind of influenced what he would do. But yeah, I mean, here, it was him, and he had a team of, I think, 8 people or so. They would paint everybody's faces gray to 200 to 300 extras every weekend when they were filming these things. And they would just kind of go to town. But Romero was really, it was the perfect pairing, because Romero was very open to Savini, just saying, yeah, do whatever you want. And they would always come up with ideas. Hey, we came up with this way to do it. Okay, yeah, let's play with that. And I think that is one of the reasons that there's such a creative vibe to so many of the effects sequences that he did here. Now, he had worked with Romero before on Martin, which as I said earlier, came out the same year, but he wasn't doing this type of effects in that particular film. I think he was acting in that one.
This one took 10 years to actually pull together resources to get it made. How did Romero do it?
Well, like I said earlier, he didn't really want to do it. It wasn't until, interestingly, one of his friends owned this mall or had just built it and gave him a tour of it. And that kind of gave him the inkling of an idea to tell a story here. And then a friend of his, I think, somehow he got Dario Argento had heard that he was talking about doing a sequel and asked him if he, if Dario could help him do it. And he said, yeah, sure. And so Argento kind of came on board to, I think the agreement was Dario would get he would get the rights to the international version, and he could cut it his own way, and basically kind of help get it made. And so that was the way that Argento brought Romero to Rome so he could write the script and all this sort of stuff. And so it was a great collaboration. And but yeah, that's why there's a different international version, because Argento got to use the footage and kind of cut it. And Argento didn't like as much of the expositional storytelling. He didn't like all those slower scenes. So a lot of that stuff got cut. A lot of the silly stuff like the music, that got cut out. He went with a much more direct, scary tone of a film. He had Goblin score it, which Romero uses some of Goblin's score, but largely he's still using a lot of the library music. In fact, the most brilliant piece is a piece called The Gonk, which is that wacky tune that plays over the end, which I just love, and Edgar Wright loved, because he has used it as well. But what's interesting about getting it made, Pete, is that, as you remember, in Night of the Living Dead, he was working with John Russo. Well, the two of them disagreed as to how this series should move forward. And because of this whole thing about Night of the Living Dead falling into the public domain, the two of them, I guess, despite the fact that they were disagreeing, they came to an agreement that they would go their own separate ways with the property that they had created in Night of the Living Dead. And Romero would have basically the rights to kind of tell the story his way with his zombies. But Russo would be able to do his own version, but he would keep the Living Dead portion of the title. And so that's why we go from Night of the Living Dead to Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, Survival of the Dead. Whereas Russo, he went on to write some, I don't know if they're books or comics or whatever, but he was doing something more literary. And he wrote Return of the Living Dead. And that, when that was made into its own film, then the follow-up Escape of the Living Dead. And that's why there's those two divergent paths that came from this, and why you don't have any more Living Dead in Romero's side of things.
Well, that is a fantastic parting of the ways.
Very interesting.
I will say, speaking of all these different cuts, and that you and I have only seen the U.S. theatrical cut. I'm very interested. If anybody else has seen the other cuts and wants to weigh in on this, jump into our Discord community and link in the show notes and check it out. There is the YouTube link that I have posted in the show notes here for this show is called the extra long version. I don't know what that means, but somebody has posted it on YouTube and they call it the extra long version, and apparently there's other stuff in there. I don't know if that's the Argento version. It's not the version I watched.
No, Argento's is shorter. If it's anything, it is the original like director's cut, because when he did the first cut, which played at I want to say it played at a festival or something, that was 100 and oh, let me find it. Hold on.
I just have to say, while you're looking for that, you can click around and look at one of the sequences. There's a zombie nun in it that goes after Franny. There's a sequence where Richard is trying to hotwire the car in the mall, and his leg is hanging out the back. And a zombie comes up and grabs the bandage, and it explodes of blood as the zombie's thumb goes into it. So that I think is different. There's just a lot of gore stuff particularly in the mall scene that is some real standout material.
Argento did cut quite a bit of the gore, the heavy gore out. Yes. Oh, so the original version was 139 minutes. That is now known as the extended or the director's cut. That was for its premiere at the 1978 Cannes Film Festival. Then he cut it down to 127 minutes for the U.S. theatrical release, which was released unrated. And then Argento cut his version down to 119 minutes. So he cut an additional 8 minutes out. But because allowing him to kind of control the international cuts, there were a lot of other variations in international lengths, because other countries would say you can't release it with that, you can't release it with this. And so my understanding is there's like 9 or 10 different length versions of cuts of this film.
This one is 159 minutes. This one that's linked in our show notes. So
interesting. That's a really long one.
It's right. It's very, very long. And so, but there is a lot of good stuff in there as I'm zipping through it. There's a lot of delicious, delicious zombie dining in here. So if you're interested in it, but the other thing that we have noted as we post YouTube links of some of these more difficult to catch movies is that there may be some sort of a content ID thing going on. So as soon as people go and watch these movies on YouTube somehow becomes aware, like it wakes up and notices that these movies exist, and then suddenly they're pulled. So I don't know if this one is going to, hit that fate, but if you are interested in seeing this particular cut, you should watch it sooner rather than later, because who knows if it's going to be there in 2 weeks.
Just a last little note about some of our cast members. It's a great little core cast of 4: David M.G., Ken Foree, Scott Reiniger, and Galen Ross. At least 2 of those, Ken Foree and Scott Reiniger, both appear in the Dawn of the Dead remake, which is good to know. Ken Foree played the, who was he? He was a guy, like a televangelist, I believe.
Right. Okay.
And Scott Reiniger is the general.
Okay. How to do an award season.
This was one of those films that is going to get noticed by places like the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films, our friends over at the Saturn Awards, who, of course, nominated Tom Savini for Best Makeup. Surprisingly, maybe, I guess, he did not end up winning. The win, of all things, was Love at First Bite. William Tuttle's work on that film.
No.
Seems strange to me that that's the one that won. And interestingly, that also beat Star Trek the Motion Picture and Alien.
Wow. What's so funny about that is that I feel like that year, that would have been, it would have been Love at First Bite that I would have seen more readily than any of these other movies. And come on, what are you going to do? George Hamilton. Right? Susan St. James. What? still,
dear. Yes.
yeah, I mean, it's weird.
Straight up shocking. And then also at the Golden Screen Awards over in Germany, this film did win the Golden Screen Award. So that was it for awards at the time. It since has won some awards for like best DVD release and things like that. But, I love to see at least that Tom Savini got some recognition for the work that he did here.
How did it do in the box office? Did Love at First Bite actually have any sort of impact on it at the box office?
Well, I can't tell you that, Pete, but with the incredible success of Night of the Living Dead, Romero went into his sequel with a budget more than 13 times bigger. He had $1.5 million, which is $4.9 million in today's dollars. The movie was released April 20th, 1979, so it was one of those funky things where it had a 1978 release, but it didn't really get a release till 1979. In a month that was populated with much lighter releases, A Perfect Couple, An Almost Perfect Affair, A Little Romance, and Manhattan. The timing likely had something to do with its popularity, but it was also clear that people wanted more gross-out zombie action because the film went on to make $5.1 million domestically and $49.9 million internationally. That adds up to about $182 million in today's dollars, making the film a resounding success and leaving Romero's second film in the trilogy with an adjusted profit per finished minute of $1.4 million.
Not a bad haul.
No, not at all.
Not a bad haul at all. I think, Andy, that this has been a treat to watch again. And I remembered it after we talked last week. The last time I watched it was when we did our conversation on the remake of this film and had the opportunity to sort of fall in love with it again. I really enjoy this movie, apart from just a few sequences that make me cringe a little bit. I love what it has to say, and again, following up on last week, it maintains its relevance.
That's the thing, is that as cheesy as I find certain elements of the film, I find none of it really problematic because it all works so well in context of the story that Romero is telling here and the themes that he has. So it's a good one. It's one that I love.
And with that, I think it's time for us to rank it.
Let's do it.
Head over to flickchart.com/thenextreel. You'll see the list of all of the movies that we've talked about on this show. And you can just swipe over in your show notes, tap the word Flickchart, and it should take you straight to this movie over at Flickchart, and you can add it to your catalog and see how it stacks up against ours.
First up, we have Dawn of the Dead, or The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Knew Me. Dawn of the Dead for me.
Yeah, I'll go with Dawn of the Dead.
Dawn of the Dead or Fargo.
Well, that's harder.
Man, this is the wall we ran into last time. I've got to go with Fargo. It hurts.
All right, I'll give you Fargo.
Dawn of the Dead or Mother.
Dawn of the Dead.
I love Mother, but Dawn of the Dead for me.
Yeah.
Dawn of the Dead or City of God.
City of God.
Yeah, that's man. Man. Dawn of the Dead or Escape from the Planet of the Apes. I am Dawn of the Dead.
I am Dawn of the Dead.
Dawn of the Dead or Forrest Gump. I am Forrest Gump.
I'll give you Forrest Gump.
Dawn of the Dead or Night of the Living Dead. This is a good battle, Pete.
I'm Dawn of the Dead.
I am too.
Oh, well, it wasn't that great of a battle.
It wasn't, but it's something that I'm always curious about. Like, which of Romero's Dead films do people hold in highest esteem?
Yeah.
I think Night of the Living Dead is an absolute classic, but Dawn is the one that I've returned to so many times.
Yeah, I mean, as much as Dawn cements so much of the rules, the lore and the rules of the zombie, like it really, and they use the word zombie for crying out loud. Like it's like finishes the story that Night started.
Yeah. Dawn of the Dead or Glengarry Glen Ross. I am Dawn of the Dead here.
Oh, what? Okay, what's happening? I am Glengarry Glen Ross.
That's okay. I am fine with you picking that one, and I'm fine if it wins, but I'm still picking Dawn of the Dead.
I was just a little bit surprised. Okay, here we go.
All right, one.
2, 3. Scissors. Okay, I tried.
There it is. Dawn of the Dead or Wild Tales? Dawn of the Dead for me.
Dawn of the Dead.
Well, that lands Dawn of the Dead at 123 on our chart, and it bumps Night of the Living Dead to 126. So it's just a hair ahead of its predecessor.
Well, I think, first of all, what does that do to your personal chart?
On my personal chart, it lands at 119 out of 4,053, which is about a 97%.
Yeah, something broke on my chart because I feel like mine should be up there, but it ended at 304 out of 1,041, which is about a 71%. So something is amiss that happened. But the bigger question is, how does 1978 Dawn of the Dead hold up against 2004 Dawn of the Dead?
I did not look at my flick chart to see where the remake stands, but this film is by far it's my favorite of between those two.
Well, and we were fans of the remake. Like we came out
absolutely.
definitely in favor of the remake. I also would prefer this film to the remake, but it turns out not by as much. This ended exactly one spot higher than the remake Dawn of the Dead. Is that
interesting?
Funny? Yeah,
that was interesting. Yeah,
it was my last or second to last rating and or comparison, and so that's where it landed. So if I were to go strictly by the algorithm over for letterboxd.com/thenextreel, this would be a 3.5 star film for me. I disagree with that, and I'm going to go solidly into the 4.5 star with a like.
I looking back at Letterboxd, I actually gave the remake 3.5 stars, which I think is probably right. I need to watch it again to see if it might actually rank a little higher. Mm-hmm. But for this film, this is one that I have really just loved forever. And even with some of the, as I've said before and gotten in trouble, some of the quibbles I might have with it.
You're giving it 5 stars.
I think this is something that is kind of a perfect for what they're trying to do. I really love it. 5 stars and a like from me.
Okay, you can have it. I feel okay being skewed north on this one. I'm okay. I just can't, like, literally when we look at where the stars started to fall, it is in Peter's escape from the mall. That is worth
That's
a half
good
star
sign
for me.
that it lasted until the last 3 minutes of the film.
Exactly. No, I'm okay with this. I feel comfortable with this.
Good.
So well done, Andy. And now we get to the movie that I have not seen in a long, long time. Where do we go from here?
We are going to be looking at the final film of this original trilogy. And I'm looking forward to watching Day of the Dead again. Yeah, like you, I have seen, well, interestingly, I think Dawn of the Dead I had seen just countless times. It was actually the first of the trilogy that I ever watched. Then I saw Day, and then I saw Night. But I think Night and Day I had only seen one time before we started this series. So I am very much looking forward to jumping back into Day of the Dead from 1985 just to check that one out again. And my recollection is I really enjoyed it, so I'm curious to revisit.
It's coming. My memory of it is that there were some bits that I liked, but otherwise it was forgettable. And I don't know. I look forward to being tested.
I do too, because I don't remember it being forgettable at all. And I'm really curious now to have a conversation with you about it, because I think it's a lot of fun.
Bring it on.
And if you would like to hear more of us, but you can't wait until next week's show, you can support us over on patreon.com/thenextreel and get access to our exclusive members-only weekend show, The Saturday Matinee.
We talk about movie news and new trailers, plus we go head-to-head in our weekly challenge in which we put together lists of movies related in some way to the movie we're discussing that week.
There are all sorts of other goodies, too, if you support us at different levels. Just head on over to patreon.com/thenextreel.
You can learn more about us and check out the detailed show notes at thenextreel.com.
You can subscribe for free in your favorite podcast app and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at The Next Reel.
And if you want to get into the conversation yourself, join our Discord channel for a whole lot of movie chat with movie lovers from around the world. You can find the link to join in the show notes or on the website.
The next reel couldn't happen without the hard work of Steven Smart, who runs Instagram,
Ben Lott, who runs all things Twitter,
and thanks to Eli Catlin, who graciously allows us to use his song Ragtime Instrumental as the theme to the show. You can find out more about Eli on his SoundCloud page.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Amazon giveth, Andy.
As Amazon always doeth.
Amazon, there are some people who like to talk about this movie in the 1-star range on Amazon.
There are. Yes, there are.
They're enthusiastic commenters. Which review are you going to mark as helpful tonight?
I am looking at Zombie Fan 1212's review. Zombie Fan 1212 says, when a director gets drunk, they make movies like this, and gives it 1 star. This is a piece of crap. What the hell is everybody thinking? The zombies all look the same. The special effects aren't very special. The acting is terrible. Romero fails to tackle consumerism. How can this be a classic? Now, the start of the movie is just boring and pointless. Dozens of people in a news studio are just yelling and screaming endlessly. People are turning into zombies all around the world, and one man cares about nothing but his ratings. Just stupid. It seems to me that the zombies in the movie were the worst done in any movie. They moved incredibly slow, slower than night, Resident Evil, and day. They were uninteresting. They do not scare the audience. In fact, the viewers laugh at them throughout the entire movie. This movie is nothing more than a terrible comedy. I didn't realize this movie had gore. I know it had pink liquid, but not gore. Then it had this stupid thing where the zombies were afraid of fire. Zombies would not be afraid of fire. Romero just can't think of things that make sense. Whoever scored this movie did a terrible job. It was ridiculous. Let's ask God to strike Romero down before he finishes his 4th dead film. His first 3 were crap and complete failures that hardly made money. What makes him think his 4th one will do good?
Wow.
A plea to the people from Zombie Fan 1212.
Oh, and to God. That's a good way. It's bringing religion into the zombie
to the
film.
people to help ask God. Let's ask God to
Everybody
strike
ask
him down.
God, yes, smite him in his director's chair. Well, I have Nikki who writes in, please, this movie is like Dawns of the Downfall. You'd have to be a zombie to consider this excruciatingly long, badly paced, terribly acted, repetitive, ridiculous, and horrifyingly unscary chore of a movie as entertainment. A scathing indictment of 20th century consumerism, proclaim the critics. A horror classic, scream the fanboys. Shoddily made balderdash, say I. Where's the build-up? Where's the apocalyptic atmosphere? Where's the horror, for Pete's sake? You can't expect anyone with any sense to be amused by the irony of a homicidal Hare Krishna 1 minute, then be genuinely shocked by offal-munching extras the next. It must be true that hell must have been full for a while in 1978, because not only did the dead walk the earth, they managed to get their clammy hands on some inferior movie-making equipment. Ouch!
I give them credit for using the word balderdash.
Yes. Balderdash. I also give them credit for using offal, because that is not a word that I use often, and so had to figure out how to pronounce it on the fly there. I think I did okay.
Awful, right?
I think it's awful, yeah. Awful munching. But you don't see that word very often.
I thought you picked it because they used your name, for Pete's sake.
Andy,
low-hanging fruit, man. I got to grab those when I can.
If I were that would be, if I had to stoop to those kinds of things, I'd be in pretty sad shape, my friend. Pretty sad shape. I don't really have a comeback for that, Andy. I'm going to let you
It's 'cause
go to sleep on that.
So good.
Thanks, Amazon. It is hard to believe that we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
So many great movies, so many great conversations. But it's a lot of work. Producing this show week after week does require a lot behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
We had some great films in Season 8 that started their lives as books or plays, and you can find all of them on our Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals.
That's the site where listeners can find links to purchase all the source material behind the adapted films we covered, from Season 1 up through our current season.
For part of Season 8, we had a series celebrating the 50th anniversary of films from 1968.
We talked about 2001 and 2010 for our Odyssey series, both adapted from Arthur C. Clarke's novels. Man, the second one was so much better than the first, right?
Don't you even get me started. Need I bring up Under the Cherry Moon again?
Yes, also so much better.
Wait, no, that's not what I...
Planet of the Apes kicked off its series based on the novel by Pierre Boulet.
We covered Danger Diabolic and The Detective, adapted from novels for our 1968 crime films.
Wait, wasn't that The Detective the prequel to Die Hard?
They were both written by Roderick Thorpe, and yes, it's the same character in the books.
I can't believe they even asked Sinatra if he'd be in Die Hard. That would have been weird.
Once Upon a Time in America was part of our Leone Once Upon a Time trilogy, adapted from Harry Gray's novel.
And we looked at 1968 Best Picture nominees The Lion in Winter, Rachel, Romeo and Juliet, and Oliver!
We also had an Ingrid Bergman series with adaptations like Spellbound, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Murder on the Orient Express, and Gaslight.
We haven't talked about Gaslight.
Stop gaslighting me!
Dive deeper into these books and more adapted films at thenextreel.com/originals. Every purchase supports the podcast.
Get the full list of adaptations that we've covered on all the Next Reel family of podcasts, and start your next read today at thenextreel.com/originals.